Welcome back to the almost daily ZenCast. This is part 2 of Look Within. The revolution is inside you or within your mind. I am your host, the fictional character in Homme de Plume known as TheIncorrigibleMrZeppo. And I went way on too long. I rambled on way too long in part 1 about my backstory and some of the correlations of real life and my fictional character's backstory. Let's get started. Looking within. What does this fool even mean, look within? Was it Nietzsche or was it Jung that said, he who looks without is sleeping, he who looks within is awakening? Or something very close to that, because I often sort of summarize awkwardly when I can't quite remember the quote. The nature of life and reality is such that we have developed a societal system that is by design all about blindering us to the truth of who and what each of us actually is. A simple way of sort of expressing it is to ask yourself the question, if it's you talking to yourself inside your head, who's the one listening? And can you listen to yourself, truly? Or does that not require some distance or separation? And of course, here I am arguing that the entire universe is an illusion of separation, right? Human history is riddled with conflict. And there's a lot of discussion about how to solve that conflict. And I think we live in an era where most of us have given up our hands, just thrown up our hands in the air and given up and said, well, conflict just is, and let them have it, as long as it doesn't bother me, as long as I'm not impacted. And I think we're slowly realizing that we've already crossed that boundary into the place where all the conflict is affecting everybody, and anybody that's sort of thought that they lived a life free from the effects of the crazy conflicts in the world is waking up to the fact that they aren't free from it at all. And that even at the personal level, we find that conflict is in like some kind of ascension in our life. It seems to be rising up. And that reminds me, I wanted to read, in the previous episode, I wanted to read a quote. And I had it pulled up and I didn't ever flip over to it. This is a quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti. I'm terrible at reading foreign names, by the way, and I apologize whenever I butcher it. Jiddu Krishnamurti, from a book called 8 Conversations. I have not read this book that I am aware of. I might have read this book and completely forgotten, but I am not aware of having read this book. I found this came across social media. Someone was posting it as a quote at someone else, and I was, I get to see it because it's how the social media works. And it struck me as something that, as this statement alone stands, it indicates truth. It speaks true things, and it isn't about the opposite of revealing the truth. That this statement is about revealing truth. Conflict in any form distorts the mind. I'll read that opening sentence again. Conflict in any form distorts the mind. This is a fact, not some opinion or judgment given thoughtlessly. Any conflict between two people prevents their understanding of each other. I'll read that again. Any conflict between two people prevents their understanding each other. Conflict, this is the next sentence. Conflict prevents perception. I'm going to read it again for emphasis. Conflict prevents perception. The understanding of what is, is the only important thing, not the formulating of what should be. Understanding, I feel every sentence is worthy of being repeated. Understanding of what is. I would have phrased it what actually is, just to give it extra emphasis. But understanding what is the only important thing, not the formulating of what should be. The division between what is and what should be is the origin of conflict. And the interval between idea and action also breeds conflict. The fact and the image are two different things. The pursuit of the image leads to every form of conflict, illusion, hypocrisy, whereas the understanding of what is, which is the only thing we really have, leads to quite a different state of mind. Again, this was stated by Jiddu Krishnamurti in 8 Conversations. This isn't an endorsement of that author or that book formally, but this passage, this particular statement, resonates deeply in general and specifically with what I wanted to talk about. They control us with conflict mind control. Us versus them. Everything is us versus them. Everything is supposed to be. Everything is peddled, packaged, and sold to you in a you're number one, everyone else is a loser kind of way. Because that is conflict. That is the separation or the gap or the difference between what actually is and some idea or theory or ideology about what should be. That's how they get us, folks. And I'm not the only one. I read that to indicate that, you can call me crazy all you want, but I'm on to something that I am not alone in, and that many other authors of much, much higher repute and academic regard than myself have already addressed and written about. And I'm just here trying to reach out to the common folk, to everybody who hasn't been exposed to this yet, and simultaneously to those who already sort of understand this stuff and have approached it in their own way and have come at it from their own sources. Because we live in a time when we cannot afford any longer to stand by and let the powers that be, let the system as it is, let the overlords, whoever they are, keep oppressing us this way. They keep pummeling us into the ground with such gentle violence. And they keep influencing us so deeply that we're out there committing violence on each other, against each other, neighbor on neighbor. And we're accepting violence and dismissing violence and even welcoming it as, oh, well, that's just part of human nature. No. Conflict is brainwashing. Violence, in the way it is being expressed now, is not human nature. It is the exacerbation of our self-defense, base animal instincts, which is something we inherited from the past, but it is not the totality of what defines us now, and it never has been the totality of what defines us as a more than just body being. We have a meat component, a meat and blood and flesh component that everyone thinks they understand but do not. Y'all don't see your own selves, your own bodies clearly. Both on the surface level, is that most people believe their own interpersonal judgment-laden sort of self-critical image of ourselves. That's why we're always... Anybody who's stressed and angry and conflicted with just themselves is because they're pursuant or attached to, or they are pursuing rather, or they are attached to, or have a stronger bond or relationship to the image of themselves that they've somehow formulated, probably deeply influenced by brainwashing techniques from all kinds of different sources in our society, as opposed to comprehending the self as it actually is. And that's the problem of all the problems. All the problems are contingent on that process. All the problems that we face, from the lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan, to the strip mining in Latin America, to the deforestation of the Brazilian rainforest, to the snow caps melting, and the politicians taking the money every time, because they always do. Name me a politician that didn't take the money. They have influenced us, forming sentences. Yay. Those in power, have influenced us, the rest of us who aspire to power, to be trapped in and pointed towards the downward negative spiral of ego trap as default. And it is the moral imperative of any one of us who is sick and tired of that framework to step up and genuinely, with a scientific sort of attitude of let's verify and confirm and repeat and make this a science we can expand on and comprehend. We need to strip away the false notions of who we are and what we are and how life ought to be, so we can perceive clearly how the world works, how our bodies work, how our spirits and minds work. And once we see clearly in ourselves and in each other, but to see that clarity, to achieve that clarity, we first need to abdicate the ideological boundaries that keep the filters closed, that prevent us from perceiving that at that level of clarity. Instead of arguing about whether or not the world is round or flat, we need to abdicate. We need to experiment with not ignoring, but releasing ourselves, freeing ourselves from the notion not only of a flat earth or a round earth, but the necessity to debate about the size and shape of Earth at all. Because we need to dig deep to our actual perception of Earth. And one ideology one ideology that forms or is the base to either of those two competing, argumentative, conflict-based ideologies of flat Earth, round Earth, is that, in other words, this is a deeper level that needs abdicating. Earth is not a place, etc. And this is true in all levels, all places. We can sort of pick apart the branching trees of ideological constructs, because they all sort of seed out and grow in a branching form from some nugget of something which is very close to being true, and then spin out of control. But we can prune it all back and get at what was real about what inspired an ideological construct and what was not real. And we can spend a lot of time debating about each particular branch, or we can just clear it, because that which is real will not go away, and only that which is false will get burned away when you abandon the ideological construct completely and allow yourself to perceive with clarity. So, how is this achieved? How can we do this? The symbol itself is sort of instructional. Look within. What does that require? That requires your ability to not look without. And that's as simple as closing your eyes. But it's not just closing your eyes. It's closing your eyes and accepting the notion, if not out of blind faith, but out of a willingness to experiment and find out if it is true. And that is the notion that you have perceptual awarenesses that are not bound by the lenses of your eyes. That while your visual feed of the fractal harmonic universe in static material form is currently dialed up to like 10 and maxed out, and the primary visual, the primary stimulus or input that we configure our opinions around the world by, or through, vis-a-vis, it is not our only awareness. It is not our only sensory apparatus. And in truth, we need to investigate the depth and diversity of the apparati that we've been denied awareness of. And as an individual, we can do this. We don't need to rely on some team of potentially corrupt, potentially particularly politically biased scientists to go explore that. We can explore that ourselves, because every human body is a part of this. There's no exceptions. This is radical all-inclusiveness of the thesis, because the thesis stems from that which actually is, as opposed to some upholding of an ideological construct about an ideal version of what should be. That which actually is that life breeds life, and all life is interconnected. That is actually there to be seen and perceived simply and purely and directly in the material plane, and also in a sort of internal imaging of other ethereal planes, because our bodies are functionally like transducing antennas. They can transmit and receive in frequencies that we've been kept ignorant about for many, many generations in a very intense way. And to test that, to validate that, to experience that is simply to ease into an acceptance that your body is itself capable, knows what it is capable of, and capable of reconnecting those things or lowering those filters, but it will take time and effort in terms of breaking free of the conditioning. You have to break free of the conditioning that binds you to the filters, that prevent you, that blinder you to the clarity that we're talking about here in terms of conflict. But we have lots of opportunities to rehearse that, to practice that, to engage in that procedure. And that begins, and it can begin anywhere, but it can be initiated in our relationships with each other, even at the acquaintance level, by how we choose to perceive one another, and how we choose to interact and engage with one another, and how often we provide each other with the opportunity to be seen and heard, and to do so without any of the pitfalls or catches of judgment and assessment and creating conflict. We can do that because we are mirrors for each other, and then we can sit in the privacy of our own space and time by ourselves and contemplate our awareness deep within, or we can sit together with another person and explore the phenomena of looking deep within the other, simultaneously. And each of these are a simple and direct approach to meditation. Meditation, of course, can be many things, many forms. There's one train of thought that argues that meditation can become anything or any activity or any experimental procedure of the human trying to be meditative, because it is not anything to begin with other than the choice and the exertation of inner subtle energy effort towards being as free of mental bias and as direct and as close to as possible to the sort of immutable point of source within oneself. How does one identify that point of source, that singularity? That's a perceptual game of hide and seek that we are playing with ourselves that's epic and has, transcends our own lifetime, but that we can sort of rediscover, re-engineer our tactics simply by achieving familiarity with ourselves internally. Even if we cannot, as many people express, really silence our mind, we can approach that. That's a simple obstacle, the inability to shut yourself up. You just give yourself something to say and or do that keeps that device or that facet of the mind occupied intensely enough and has sort of self-defining manifestation invocations in that which you were saying. So ancient mantras or ancient visual mandalas, they have a deep authority because of their ancientness. But also, if they're too foreign and too abstract for an individual so that they render nothing and achieve nothing besides frustration, then they're not really pragmatically available to that individual at that time, are they? That is why the truth is any sentence given the right esoteric intentionality, the right sort of spiritual choice making and being crafted and being used, anything can become mantra and have power of mantra. The human apparatus has higher magnitudes or higher orders of operation than we have been allowed to recognize for many generations. And all of these higher order operational phenomena are organic to the human body, because the human body is not isolated in some sort of space unto itself. It's a living, breathing aspect and part of the whole. And so the whole operates in ways that we have not been allowed to comprehend, the whole being the entire cosmos. And we have a job here in the cosmos, which we will not really understand as individuals until we begin to really make progress on that inner journey, which is wonderfully simple and yet vexingly complex, because we go nowhere but deeper and deeper inside oneself. And that in going deeper and deeper inside oneself and allowing that to be whatever it actually is, as opposed to expect it to be anything to be expected, then we are shown without any much effort to define, because we are many-faceted in this self that we sort of pretend is the singularity, that we can perceive the singularity. We can at least be given a sort of internal phenomenological acknowledgement via, awareness of things that we usually filter out, that we can sort of get a sense of perceiving the singularity. What's fun about that is that it's all a sort of a hall of mirrors, because we are the singularity. Inside the depths of the inner world of each individual body resides this cumulative, hyper-networked singularity of singularities, manifold, ever-present inside the center of all matter. Right? That's really complex and confusing. Physics is trying to get at it, and the last time I dipped into some cutting-edge physics, they were getting there. Is that the boundary of the projected world sort of then resonates and manifests frequency expressions, or the expressions of frequencies that then have cumulative effects on many levels. At the super microscopic level, we're sort of approaching the comprehension of the probability wave function manifestation of the subatomic elements that become material. And at this level, the human interpersonal level, we're realizing that there's a truth to applying the lessons of the microscopic and the macroscopic to our phenomena. Once we break through the boundaries of these belief structures that limit our understanding and our perception and our comprehension. That's why we need to nurture a growing movement in our society that gently introduces people to these things not as ideological constructs, but as phenomena that you can experience yourself. And here are the tools to achieving a deep experiencing of these phenomena that some of us have described and experienced before you. Not because we're better, but because we got given some invitation by another. Therefore, it is our calling to bring out this invitation to you. And I say that as not as a member of any... I officially do not belong to any esoteric group or tradition. I'm merely recognizing that there is enough of that activity going on in the world, in a true and genuine sense, that we are lucky that there is indeed still touchstone wisdom laying about that is not that difficult to access to the average person. And that those of us who've already garnered some experience in developing our tools and in exploring ourselves and in opening up these inner gates that we'll get to discussing in depth at some point, I'm sure, that we understand that there's no way to conditionally teach anyone about this, but that we are called upon to bear witness to this fact. And in participating in the practicing with others, we can help bring to their attention how to discover this within themselves. And once you start discovering this within yourself, you don't really need anyone like me, whether it's me or the Pope or Gandhi or Buddha himself or even the persona Jesus. Not to disrespect any of those people, but they were not designing a system of worshiping them. They were not peddling a package of saying, hey, worship me, and then you'll get this good stuff. They were, in the true sense of what I'm exploring here in this particular episode, trying to show others where the beginning of their own self-liberating path began. And saying, once you go down that path, you will no longer need any other guidance other than yourself to rediscover and re-remember and reawaken within this body avatar. Because every body avatar is interconnected to every other body avatar, because we are all birthed from one family. You follow this is science. This is not an article of faith. You follow the genome back, and it's a branching spiral, branching out into diversity. But when you follow it backwards and perceive it that way and understand it that way, it is also branching down into singularity. Life was one genome at some point, one instance of one genome at one point. And all of us are related to that one instance, that singularity of genome, wherever it occurred, whenever it occurred, however long ago, and however difficult it may have, been to, improbable it was. It occurred. And we don't know much more about that because these mind-body apparatuses, which are blindered and brainwashed into believing that we only exist here and now, these bodies could not have been, were not there then. But the unity of consciousness that is resident within all points of the cosmos and within all expressions of the life genome and deep within every quark and nanostructural element of the very fundamental quantum mechanical ingredients that make up the basic elemental structures of each genome. It's that complex. That's why Indra's net of jewels is the symbol that this one culture uses, that is really powerful, that if you use it yourself, despite of cultural boundaries, you don't need it to be explained to you in English, because it explains itself. It's one of those really great symbols. And why we have symbols like that from all cultures and throughout. They are not to be taken literally, but they are to be absorbed and had to be inspired by figuratively and metacognitively, because they represent something so much more complex than anything literal our language-bound mind can produce. And that's where we get hung up. There's a lot of argumentation going on in the world, a lot of conflict. So the flow of that statement I read earlier is a two-way flow. That's a two-way street being described. Conflict alters perception. But from within, one can alter one's own perception. We call that healing in my circle, in my personal thinking, I call that healing. I find that others do too. So that we can unalter or undistort the perception between us and others, and hopefully achieve the opposite of conflict in the relationships that we're having. It takes practice, and it's a very nuanced thing. We've been encouraged by society to become very blunt, very blocky, very large chunk, and we sort of dismiss nuance in the way we approach life nowadays, and that's not an accident. It's just like we dismiss spiritual, magical, trans-dimensional, transcendental stuff in education, thinking, wisdom. We dismiss it out of hand. People knee-jerk response, oh, I don't know. I don't believe in that sort of stuff. I don't believe in yoga. I don't believe in meditation. That's everywhere, and it's ubiquitous, and it's sort of considered common sense. It's not an accident. They're trying to prevent you and everybody else that is just like you from rediscovering through re-engineering their own private practice, because it takes a private practice. We are all on our own path. That's why they've given us a million toys to play with. They keep us on our own path of obsession on the ego downward spiral of avoiding ascension. Thus, the significance. The need is dire. The need out there in this current moment in history for a real revolution is incredibly true. The people in power are, even at the overt place, they are just puppets. Everybody from Donald Trump through Mike Pence, Priebus. We can go through the tedium of debating each individual and whether or not they're all puppets. We are all puppets. Because none of us are actually awake yet, embodying their true divine self in metastructural form. We might have been at one point, but that was a long time ago. And we might have hit some resonance and some nostalgia memory and some body organic, manifestation expressions of that deep, long ago memory of being very involved in the upward process of ascension and approaching that big enlightenment and transcendence beyond this multi-leveled physical classroom of first through kindergarten through 7th grade or whatever, however you want to chop it up, as symbol, as analogy. But we are just now waking up, rousing ourselves and each other from a deep slumber, and we are already hungry for revolution against those who have sort of tamped us down and kept us sleeping. But we can't rush out into the external world and try to do it through all the, external world means by which we usually, historically, talk about revolution in the material sense. Because just look at all those revolutions that happened. Lots of people died. Lots of suffering was engendered amongst the survivors. Lots of trauma. Lots of hatred. Lots of seeds were planted for future generations to despise those who dared rebel and those who dared oppress each other. And none of the problems have been fixed. None of the problems have been fixed. Are we taking care of the poor as Jesus asked us to? Are we feeding the hungry as Buddha recommended? Are we healing the sick the way every prophet ever asked us to? For free, without profiteering on them, without judging them because of money, without hating them for being poor. That's what they asked us to do. Why? Because that is the next school classroom. Getting past our objective conflict, our it's not objective. It's completely subjective, but it creates objective, manifest division. getting past our subjective conflict generation dislike for other, this addiction that we have. And it requires a deep, deep, deep personal dedication to being of real service to others. And while we still talk about it a lot, especially in the context of the faith system organizations, the religious fiscal institutions that were created around everybody's brand, we don't really do it that well. Each religion is much better at generating conflict now than it's ever been. And we will never solve the problem. We will never overcome terrorism, which is a sort of hyper-expressed retaliation against the very kind of crazy that religions create, by trying to create an even more extreme version. It's extremism taken to its extreme. Right? And we already have extremism, even within the centrist, normative, regular, everyday, acceptable sense of what religions are expressing themselves as. And it's because all religions were derailed. If you don't like the term hijacked, all religions were derailed a long time by an agency within our own ego. Even if there are churches out there that do not have direct money ties to the corporate, military, industrial conflict generating business, if they are not themselves fiscally, financially receiving benefit through some, indirect or back-channel-y sort of form from the complex that is profiteering on the wars that we are in part using religion to excuse and normalize, then they are, non-participatory in the activities that are required to transcend that problem in some fashion, because they've been affected with the bug of greed and laziness and wanting all the praise and the glory. Or they've been turned into money-generating mills for an individual that controls his congregation his or her congregation through the power of the other most common brainwashing technique distributed throughout the world today, which is the cult of personality. We all love our celebrities. We love our superheroes. We love Jesus. We love this particular preacher. We love this particular minister. We love this particular guru. And in giving our belief over to these systems without first attending to our own internal authenticity, then we are just keeping ourselves oppressed. That's why the revolution has to happen within first. As always, thanks for listening. I hope my ramblings somehow encourage you, inspire you to try any practice, whether it's just sitting in silence or repeating one of the mantras I've suggested or some mantra. It really just has to feel good, genuine, and true. It's not always about being uplifting, although ascension is generally uplifting. May peace, love, and grooviness flower in your heart. May you, conversely, be able to transmute all the negative energy, stress, fear, anxiety, and anger that is engendered by our postmodern society. Deep down, you know that what we're talking about is something innate and natural, and that you are going to remember. And it doesn't really matter what teachings you started with or what form you began with. Namaste, dear listener. Until next time, this has been the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.